Overnight, President Obama went to visit those 18 flag-draped coffins as they returned to Dover Air Force Base. You might recall earlier this year, President Obama lifted the ban on media coverage of fallen troops returning to the U.S. at Dover, a ban that critics said hid the costs of war from the American people. Well, overnight, President Obama got to see firsthand the costs of the war.
With the looming decision of how to proceed in Afghanistan on his mind, the president made his first trip to the Delaware Air Base. It was not announced to the media until late last night. President Obama boarded Marine One at 11:44 p.m. and arrived at Dover before 1 a.m. The bodies returning are 15 soldiers who died in Afghanistan earlier this week. Reporters witnessed the dignified transfer of one soldier's body, U.S. Army Sergeant Dale Griffin from Terre Haute, Indiana. Before the ceremony, Mr. Obama met with Griffin's family in a chapel on the base. Also on board, 3 DEA agents whose helicopter crashed Monday in Afghanistan. Michael Weston, a graduate of Stanford and Harvard Law. Chad Michael, a former SWAT team member from Tampa. And Forrest Lehman, who was due home in January just in time for the birth of his first child. The event was a departure from recent history. President Bush visited with hundreds of families of fallen soldiers, but never went to Dover to receive the remains of the fallen. Earlier this week, Mr. Obama met with soldiers and Marines at a naval air station in Florida. Also present were family members of soldiers killed in Iraq and Afghanistan.
And while I will never hesitate to use force to protect the American people or our vital interests, I also promise you this, and this is very important as we consider our next steps in Afghanistan. I will never rush the solemn decision of sending you into harm's way. I won't risk your lives unless it is absolutely necessary.
On Friday, President Obama will meet with the Joint Chiefs of Staff as part of his ongoing review of the war policy in Afghanistan. Diane?
And how did they make the decision to do that last night, Jake?
Well, ever since the ban on media coverage of the return of these fallen soldiers was lifted, President Obama has said he wanted to visit these fallen troops as they come back to Dover Air Force Base, but he wanted to do so in the least obstructive way possible. On Tuesday, he was told that the logistics were possible for him to visit these fallen troops, and on Wednesday they made the decision, and it was very powerful for the president, aides say. He went into the airplane with the 18 cases and spent some time alone, except for one military aide, with those cases, with these fallen. And then on the helicopter ride back, the president thanked his military aide, and then no one said a word for the duration of the 45-minute trip back to Washington, D.C.